This is the Exposure Brief, a weekly dispatch from Swift Signal Digital for AI native founders navigating the 2026 resilience landscape. I'm your host. Every week, we deconstruct the gaps between automation claims and regulatory reality. On today's briefing, our analysts dive into the latest FSC mandates and the tactical shift toward outcome-based governance. Let's head into the lab.
Imagine waking up on a Tuesday morning, right? You're pouring your first cup of coffee, and you get an email. And you find out that because a junior developer on your team fine-tuned an open-source AI model over the weekend just to help write marketing emails a little faster, your 20-person sauce startup is now carrying the exact same billion-dollar product liability as a massive multinational AI lab.
Yeah, that is a terrifying way to start a Tuesday.
Right. So you panic. You immediately check your enterprise contracts, you look at your liability caps, and your legal counsel essentially tells you, those caps are now completely void. Welcome to Q2 2026.
And the crazy thing is that scenario is no longer just a hypothetical risk. It's not something designed to just scare people during a tabletop security exercise anymore.
No, it's real.
It's very real. We are witnessing the absolute collapse of regulatory theorizing. I mean, for the past 3 years, AI governance was effectively, what was it, like a PDF document you stuck in a shared compliance folder?
Oh, yeah. Just a nice list of best practices.
Exactly. But now we're looking at a landscape where governance is transitioning into a hard, immutable engineering requirement. It's what we're calling the dawn of enforcement engineering.
Enforcement engineering, I like that term.
Start
and
creating
so
today
our
at
mission on this
wondercraft.ai.
deep dive today is to map out the exact mechanics of this transition. Because look, if you were listening to this and you are building, funding, or insuring SaaS products right now, the ground just opened up beneath your feet. We have a super dense, highly technical stack of source material to unpack today to understand the shift. We're looking at the U.S. Blackburn Bill, which is formerly known as the AI Late Act, the final text from the EU AI Omnibus Trilogue negotiations, NZI's definitive guide on agentic AI governance, Psycode's complete guide to AI bills and materials, and the NIST AI 601 generative AI profile.
That is a hefty stack of reading. But, the overarching through line across all these disparate sources is that the traditional sauce shield is cracking. It's cracking under the sheer weight of artificial intelligence. We have officially entered the show your work era of technology. I mean, you cannot just rely on a generic terms of service document to protect you anymore.
Made with Wondercraft.
Right,
Start
don't do bad
creating
things
today
with our
at
software clause.
Exactly. That's dead. Regulators and insurers are now demanding that you mathematically and structurally
Made with
prove your
Wondercraft.
safety mechanisms
Start
right at the
creating
code
today
level.
at wondercraft.ai.
Safety is a feature now, not a footnote.
Which means, as pragmatists, we need a concrete architectural plan. So by the end of this deep dive, we're going to build a Friday action checklist for you. We want you to walk into your engineering stand-ups tomorrow knowing exactly which pipelines to re-architect, which models to audit, and which contract clauses to rip up and rewrite.
That's the goal. What do we build differently tomorrow?
Let's dive right into it. Let's look at the mechanics of that cracking sauce shield. And I want to start with the Blackburn Bill in the United States. Because, for the last decade, tech regulation here has been almost exclusively viewed through the lens of data privacy.
Today at
We're talking CCPA, HIPA, things like that.
Right, the old paradigms.
But the AI Lead Act pulls this massive legislative bait and switch. It just bypasses data privacy entirely and drops AI regulation squarely into the realm of tort law.
And that is a fundamental rewiring of the legal framework that the software industry relies on. You think about traditional software distribution. If a cloud tool failed, or if it caused a massive business interruption, the vendor just pointed to the master service agreement.
The trusty MSA.
The trusty MSA, yeah. And that MSA typically capped liability at the cost of a 12-month subscription. It essentially pushed all the operational risk onto the deployer.
Right.
But the Blackburn Bill changes that completely. It introduces a federal general duty of care for AI developers. It treats algorithmic failures, which the legislative text actually defines as including financial loss or psychological anguish, like a defective physical product.
Wait, psychological anguish, that's in the text.
It is. We are talking about strict liability for defective design, failure to warn, and the distribution of unreasonably dangerous products, just like if you sold a car with faulty brakes.
Wow. Okay, which brings us directly to the trapdoor for builders here, which is the substantial modification clause. This is huge. The bill states that if a deployer substantially modifies an AI system, they absorb the legal liability of the original developer.
Yeah, this is the part that keeps founders up at night.
Let's look at the engineering reality of this.
Yeah.
So, say a startup takes the base weights of an open source model like Llama 4, right? And they fine-tune them using LoRa.
Low-rank adaptation.
Exactly. So they fine-tune it on a proprietary data set of, let's say, medical interactions to build a specialized clinical copilot. Now, they certainly haven't built the foundation model from scratch. They didn't spend the hundreds of millions on compute. But legally, under this bill, they just bought all the risk associated with it.
Yes, they bought it all. The underlying logic from a regulator is that the delta between the base model and that fine-tuned adapter, that's exactly where the new domain-specific behavior lives.
Right, because you're changing the math.
Exactly. When you apply those new weights, you are permanently altering the underlying probability distribution of the model's outputs. The regulators recognize that this modification is what creates the specific, foreseeable risk in a high-stakes vertical like healthcare.
So it's not just a wrapper anymore.
No, not at all. You are no longer just making API calls to a black box. You are actively shaping the model's neural pathways to generate highly specialized, consequential text.
Which means you have to document that delta mathematically. You need cryptographic proof of the provenance of the training data you used for that fine-tuning, the specific loss functions you optimized for, and the adversarial testing you ran against the new adapter.
Yep. Pointing back to the open source creator, when your clinical copilot recommends, a lethal drug interaction, that is no longer a valid legal defense. You have stepped into the shoes of the developer.
You are the developer now.
You are. And the AI-led Act also applies this new liability framework to a highly specific set of demographic and political protections. It's really interesting how they structured it. The stated goal in the text is to protect the 4 Cs.
The 4 Cs, right, which are children, creators, conservatives, and communities.
Exactly. So just looking purely at the mechanical compliance requirements here and reporting this totally impartially based on what's in the text protecting children involves sunsetting Section 230 protections for AI-generated content.
Okay, let's pause there because removing Section 230 is a structural earthquake for the internet.
It's massive.
That law has historically shielded platforms from liability for what their users post. If an AI platform loses that protection, they basically become the legal publisher of every single token their model generates, making them directly liable for defamation or harm.
And furthermore, the bill actually integrates the Kids Online Safety Act. So it outright bans market and product research on users under 13, and it requires verifiable parental consent architecture for anyone under 17.
So if you were building like an educational companion bot, your liability exposure just went through the roof.
Now moving to the second group, creators. The bill alters the foundational economics of model training. It codifies that unauthorized ingestion of copyrighted works does not constitute fair use under the Copyright Act.
Which means all that web scraping.
Yeah, you have to implement strict provenance tracking and opt-out mechanisms right at the web scraper level. And it also mandates the adoption of NIST guidelines for the cryptographic watermarking of generated content.
Oh, and making the removal of those watermarks a federal offense, right?
Exactly. Stripping watermarks is now a federal crime under this framework.
Okay, then we have the protections for the third C, conservatives. The text aims to prevent political discrimination in AI outputs.
Right.
So mechanically, what that means is if you are a sauce builder aiming for any sort of federal procurement, the bill requires you to mathematically prove your model's political neutrality through third-party audits.
It's an intense auditing process.
You have to demonstrate that the latent space of your model does not skew towards specific ideological outputs, specifically avoiding what the legislation terms woke AI.
And doing that requires a completely new branch of algorithmic auditing. You're utilizing complex matrices to prove an absence of bias in next token prediction, which is incredibly difficult from an engineering standpoint.
And finally, for the last C, communities, the compliance burden shifts toward physical and economic infrastructure.
Yeah, this one is fascinating. Companies over a certain revenue threshold have to file quarterly reports to the Department of Labor detailing AI-driven workforce displacement.
Basically proving if you're replacing human jobs.
Exactly. And detailing any job reskilling efforts. Additionally, data center operators are required to enter binding agreements with the Department of Energy to insulate local power grids from rate hikes.
Because of the massive energy draw of those AI training clusters.
Right. And failure to secure these agreements results in the loss of federal tax incentives.
So, stepping back, it fundamentally transforms the U.S. from a landscape of minimal friction into an environment of heavy product liability, mandatory audits, and, frankly, intense infrastructural oversight.
It's a complete 180.
But while the U.S. is radically expanding, WHO is legally responsible by treating modifications as development. The European Union is simultaneously redefining what kind of failures make you liable.
The contrast in their methodology is really striking. The EU AI Omnibus Trilogue from April 9th, 2026 took a very different technical approach.
Let's establish the timelines first on this EU Omnibus.
Yeah.
Because the European Commission originally pushed for conditional rolling deadlines, right? Depending on market penetration.
They did, yeah.
Yeah.
But the Council and the Parliament completely rejected that framework in the final trilogue. They locked in hard, fixed enforcement dates.
Hard dates. Okay, what are we looking at?
We are looking at December 2, 2027 for standalone high-risk systems. So these are things listed in Annex 3, like biometric sorting, employment filters, or essential infrastructure management. And then August 2, 2028 for AI systems embedded in products that are already regulated under existing sectoral safety laws.
But wait, didn't they include some proportionality benefits for smaller companies?
They did. For small mid-cap enterprises, they reduced some of the bureaucratic documentation burden. But here's the kicker. The core baseline requirements still hit in August 2026.
August 2026, so that's just around the corner. Which is why, as a pragmatist, enterprise-grade SaaS builders need to treat August 2026 as their true operational deadline.
Absolutely. You can't wait until 2027.
And the most immediate critical exposure in that baseline is the expansion of Article 5 for prohibited AI practices. The Trilogue explicitly banned what they classify as new-to-fire generative systems.
Yeah, let's unpack that because it's crucial.
So these are systems capable of generating non-consensual intimate images, or NCII, as well as child sexual abuse material. And obviously, legitimate enterprise platforms are not designing their software to generate this content. Nobody wants that.
Of course not.
But the text establishes what we're calling a strict liability trap. The ban applies not just if a tool is built for that purpose, but if the generation of this material is reasonably foreseeable due to insufficient system guardrails.
And this represents the death of the generic terms of service defense. I mean, for the last few years, a platform could just add a legal clause forbidding the generation of illicit content.
Right, like, please don't use our image generator for this.
Exactly. And if a user executed some complex jailbreak to bypass the filters, the platform would ban the user's account and point to the policy violation as proof they were acting in good faith.
The old "we tried our best" offense.
Yeah. But under the new Article 5 interpretation, if a user can bypass your API with simple prompt engineering, the vulnerability is considered reasonably foreseeable. You failed to harden the model, you are liable.
Wow. So you have to move from reactive moderation to proactive structural defense. Like, you can't just slap a regex filter on the output layer to catch bad words anymore.
No, regex won't save you.
You actually have to implement adversarial training during the fine-tuning phase, utilizing techniques like latent space bounding to physically prevent the model's neural network from even assembling the visual or textual features required for prohibited content.
It has to be structurally incapable of doing it.
Right. Because if the capability exists within the weights and an attacker can easily access it with a clever prompt, you are legally culpable.
And this proactive hardening philosophy aligns perfectly with another source in our stack, the NIST AI 600-to-1 Generative AI Profile.
Yes, the NIST profile.
NIST details specific generative risks that require systemic architectural mitigation. They call out toxicity, bias, intellectual property infringement, and CBRN information risks.
Let's talk about CBRN, which stands for chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear information. Because the primary risk here isn't that the AI possesses highly classified state secrets, right? It's not stealing launch codes.
No. The risk is that the model drastically lowers the barrier to entry. It synthesizes publicly available but highly dense scientific literature into actionable step-by-step instructions.
So it takes something a PhD could figure out in 6 months and gives it to a teenager in 10 seconds.
Exactly. And hardening against that requires incredibly sophisticated semantic filtering that understands the underlying intent of a prompt, not just keyword matching.
It's so complex. And there is also a vital linguistic shift in the NIST text regarding system accuracy that I think fundamentally alters how we talk about liability.
The hallucination debate.
Yes, the entire tech industry has relied on the term hallucination to describe fabricated outputs for years, but NIST actively deprecates that term. They note that it inappropriately anthropomorphizes the software.
It implies a human-like confusion, like the AI just had a temporary lapse in judgment.
Exactly. And it has functioned as this brilliant, subtle liability shield for vendors. Like if an AI hallucinates, it sounds like an unavoidable quirk of consciousness, something organic and blameless.
Right, like, oh, our AI was just dreaming. We can't be held responsible for its dreams.
Yeah. But by replacing it with the technical term confabulation, NIST strips away the anthropomorphism entirely. A confabulation is a statistical failure.
It's math going wrong.
Yes. It occurs when the next token prediction probabilities diverge from the grounded source data, or they invent false content based on temperature variance.
And treating it as a statistical mathematical defect means it is an engineering failure, which ties directly back to the U.S. shift toward product liability.
It's a defective product.
Exactly. If a medical research co-pilot confabulates a case citation or a drug interaction, that is a defective product output. It requires a systemic architectural fix, not an apology to the user.
Man. And look, proactive model hardening and confabulation mitigation are immensely challenging, even when the AI operates in a simple request-response paradigm.
Yeah.
You know, when a user asks a question and the model provides text.
That's the easy stuff.
Right. But the engineering complexity scales exponentially the moment you give that AI the ability to execute actions on its own. Which takes us to our next source material.
Yes. We are moving rapidly from the era of generative AI into the era of agentic AI.
Today at wondercraft.ai.
The Gartner projections in our Enzi source material suggest that by 2028, agentic capabilities will be embedded in over a third of all enterprise software applications. That's up from less than 1% in 2024.
In a matter of months, we went from research prototypes to massive enterprise deployments.
Start creating
it's wild.
today
Let's
at
define the mechanical difference between these
wondercraft.ai.
architectures for a second. Because a conventional large language model requires continuous human prompting. It waits for input.
Right, it's a chatbot.
But an agentic system utilizes a React architecture reasoning and acting. So you give it a high-level, open-ended objective like provision a secure cloud environment for a new client.
And then
Made
it just
with
goes.
Wondercraft.
It just goes.
Start
The
creating
agent
today at
decomposes that objective into
wondercraft.ai.
subtasks. It determines which internal APIs it needs to call, executes the commands to spin up servers, analyzes the JSON responses, and it even corrects its own configuration errors in a continuous multi-step loop, all without waiting for human input.
It possesses
Made
operational
with
autonomy.
Wondercraft. Start
And because it can
creating
change the
today
state of the
at
world by modifying
wondercraft.ai.
databases, sending emails, or executing financial transactions, the traditional governance crutch of the human-in-the-loop is collapsing completely.
Yeah, let's be real about the human in the loop. For years, companies shielded themselves from liability by
Made
adding
with
a UI
Wondercraft.
disclaimer
Start
stating
creating
a human
today
must
at
verify all AI actions
wondercraft.ai.
before execution.
The ultimate cover-your-ass button.
Exactly.
Mm.
But regulators, supported by the NIST Profiles research on human psychology, are categorizing this
Made
as
with
a
Wondercraft.
dangerous legal
Start
fiction.
creating today at
NIST points to two
wondercraft.ai.
specific cognitive phenomena here: algorithmic aversion and automation bias.
Automation bias is the critical vulnerability here, because as autonomous agents become highly reliable executing complex tasks
Made with
correctly,
Wondercraft. Start
99
creating today
times
at
out of 100 human operators
wondercraft.ai.
become psychologically conditioned to over-rely on them.
Right. You get complacent.
You do. The operator stops rigorously reviewing the agent's 50-step reasoning chain and
Made
simply
with
starts rubber
Wondercraft.
stamping the
Start
final
creating
output.
today at
The
wondercraft.ai.
human is no longer an active oversight mechanism. They are merely a liability sponge absorbing the risk for the developer.
A liability sponge. That is a brutal phrase, but it's so accurate. So if your SaaS
Made with
product
Wondercraft.
executes
Start
consequential
creating today
decisions
at
like autonomous
wondercraft.ai.
DevOps deployments, algorithmic trading, or resume filtering, a generic human-in-the-loop disclaimer offers zero protection under the EU AI Act.
Zero. You need verifiable cryptographic proof of meaningful
Made with
oversight.
Wondercraft.
And this is where
Start
Enzi's
creating
definitive
today
guide
at
on agentic AI governance provides a
wondercraft.ai.
concrete architectural blueprint. They actually outline a 5-layer governance framework designed specifically to safely deploy autonomous agents while maintaining Article 12 compliance under the EU AI Act.
Okay, let's break down those 5 layers. I love a good framework.
So layer 1
Made
is
with
autonomy
Wondercraft.
classification.
Start creating
You must
today
rigorously
at
classify your agent's
wondercraft.ai.
capabilities across 4 distinct tiers.
Kind of like self-driving cars.
Very similar. Tier 1 is assistive,
Made with
requiring
Wondercraft.
explicit
Start
human approval
creating
for
today
every
at
single action.
wondercraft.ai.
Tier 2 is supervised, where the agent executes actions within strict parameters while a human actively monitors. Tier 3 is bounded autonomous, operating with autonomy but within a heavily constrained action space. And Tier 4 is fully autonomous, operating with broad discretion over open-ended tasks.
Made
Okay,
with
so your
Wondercraft.
governance architecture
Start
obviously
creating
has to
today
scale
at
to match your tier,
wondercraft.ai.
which leads to layer 2, action whitelisting.
Yes.
And this requires a complete inversion of how we typically grant system permissions. You must use a strict allow list approach. Every single tool, API, endpoint, or parameter is denied by default.
You are defining the bounded action space. You grant the agent-specific IAM roles,
Made with
identity, and access
Wondercraft.
management
Start
permissions,
creating
and you
today
set
at
hard impact limits.
wondercraft.ai.
Give me an example of an impact limit.
So, for example, an autonomous agent might have read and write access to a specific CRM database table, right? But the transaction size it can
Made with
authorize is
Wondercraft.
hard-capped at a
Start
specific
creating
dollar
today
amount,
at wondercraft.ai.
and it absolutely cannot access the underlying payment gateway.
Okay, I need to push back on the practical implementation of Layer 2, though. Because if a development team has to manually configure and whitelist every single API,
Made with
endpoint,
Wondercraft.
parameter
Start
constraint,
creating
and
today at
IAM role
wondercraft.ai.
an agent might ever need to invoke, won't that completely throttle the dynamic innovation that makes these agents valuable in the first place?
I hear that a lot from engineering teams.
Right. Like, you are effectively forcing developers to hard-code a massive decision tree, which defeats the purpose of utilizing a dynamic, autonomous LLM.
The initial
Made
instinct
with
is
Wondercraft.
definitely to view
Start
whitelisting
creating
as a
today at
massive operational bottleneck.
wondercraft.ai.
But banded action spaces actually create the operational trust required for enterprise scale.
How so?
Think of it like giving a new intern a corporate credit card. You do not hand a brand new intern a limitless black card and simply hope they make good financial choices based on the employee handbook, right?
Made with
Definitely
Wondercraft.
not.
No.
Start creating
You give them a
today at
card hard-capped at
wondercraft.ai.
$500, restricted entirely to office supply vendors. That constraint is what makes the empowerment possible. Without systematic, provable constraints, an enterprise chief information security officer will only ever
Made
allow
with
your agent to
Wondercraft.
operate
Start
in
creating
low-value,
today at
read-only
wondercraft.ai.
sandbox environments.
Oh, that clarifies the mechanism perfectly. The constraint enables the deployment.
Exactly.
Okay, and when the agent hits the boundary of that
Made
constraint,
with
when the intern
Wondercraft.
needs to make
Start
a
creating
$1,000
today at
software purchase,
wondercraft.ai.
it triggers Layer 3, escalation logic.
Yes. You engineer predefined triggers where the agent must pause its
Made
autonomous
with
execution
Wondercraft.
and
Start
hand the
creating
context
today
window
at
back to a human operator.
wondercraft.ai.
So what do those triggers look like in the code?
These triggers are based on mathematical confidence thresholds. So if the model's probabilistic confidence in an API response drops below, say, 85%, it halts. You can also use impact limits. If an autonomous DevOps agent calculates that a configuration change will
Wondercraft.
require rebooting
Start
a
creating
primary
today
production
at
server, that triggers an
wondercraft.ai.
immediate escalation.
Awesome. So once the human steps in, we hit Layer 4, which is perhaps the most critical item for our Friday action checklist, traceability and audit trails.
The intervention logs.
Yes, the intervention logs. You cannot just claim a human reviewed the escalation. You must generate immutable audit trails
Made with
proving the
Wondercraft.
human reviewed
Start
the
creating
exact
today at
reasoning chain.
wondercraft.ai.
And Article 12 of the EU AI Act demands this exact level of traceability. You are logging the initial prompt, every subsequent API call the agent made, the JSON payloads returned by those tools, the intermediate conclusions the model drew, and the specific timestamped and session ID of the human who
Made with
authorized the
Wondercraft.
override.
Start
And people are
creating
using
today
cryptographic
at
hashes for this, right?
Yeah, many
wondercraft.ai.
architectures are using Merkle trees to cryptographically hash these logs so they cannot be altered or tampered with after the fact.
Brilliant. Followed by Layer 5, continuous monitoring. Because agents operate dynamically and adapt to new data, traditional point-in-time security audits are kind of obsolete. You must implement continuous
Made
behavioral
with
monitoring
Wondercraft.
pipelines to
Start
detect
creating
performance
today
degradation,
at
alignment drift, or
wondercraft.ai.
security anomalies in real time.
Architecting autonomy classification, action whitelisting, escalation logic,
Made with
traceability,
Wondercraft.
and continuous
Start creating
monitoring.
today at
It is an immense
wondercraft.ai.
infrastructural lift. I won't sugarcoat it.
It's a ton of work.
It is. But building this architecture is no longer just about
Made
passing a
with
regulatory
Wondercraft.
audit from
Start
the EU
creating
or the
today
US
at
government. It is the
wondercraft.ai.
fundamental prerequisite for financial survival.
Why financial survival?
Because without this proof, your company will become uninsurable next year.
Wow. Okay, this brings
Made
us
with
perfectly to the
Wondercraft.
CFO's
Start
perspective
creating today at
and the data from Psycho's
wondercraft.ai.
2026 State of Product Security Report. Let's talk about insurance.
Let's do it.
Because the statistics regarding enterprise visibility into AI are staggering. According to Psycode, only
Made with
19% of
Wondercraft.
organizations have
Start
full visibility
creating
into
today
where
at
and how AI models are
wondercraft.ai.
operating across their development pipelines.
19%. which means 81% of companies are completely plagued by shadow AI.
Shadow AI, meaning developers are just pulling down open source models from repositories, integrating third-party APIs to speed up their coding, and fine-tuning data sets without any centralized tracking or security review.
They're moving fast and breaking things. And the insurance industry has completely caught on to this massive, unquantified exposure.
Right. For the 2026 cyber insurance renewal cycle, major carriers are aggressively decoupling traditional data breach coverage from AI-specific risks.
Start creating
This is a
today at
huge shift.
It is.
wondercraft.ai.
If you suffer a standard data exfiltration event, your traditional policy might cover it. But if you get sued for confabulation liability because your model generated legally disastrous advice, or if you fall victim to model poisoning, where an attacker corrupts your fine-tuning data set to inject malicious backdoors, traditional cyber policies will die the claim entirely.
They won't pay a dime. Carriers are now demanding mandatory AI security writers to cover these novel threat vectors. And to underwrite those writers, they require total, verifiable visibility into your AI stack.
You have to prove what you're running.
Exactly. If you cannot provide a comprehensive accounting of your models, your training data provenance, and your governance controls, your premiums will skyrocket. Or worse, you will be denied coverage entirely. You become functionally uninsurable.
Uninsurable SaaS is dead SaaS. So the required artifact for this visibility is the AI Bill of Materials, or AI BOM.
The AI BOM.
It acts as a continuously updated cryptographic inventory of your entire AI architecture. And an effective AI BOM must track the specific model architectures in production, the exact version numbers, the cryptographic hashes of the data sets used for fine-tuning, the specific system prompts guiding the models, all open-source library dependencies, and the intervention logs we discussed in the Enzyme framework.
But here's the logistical challenge.
Made with Wondercraft.
Modern DevOps moves far too fast for manual documentation.
Developers already hate writing documentation.
They despise it. And models are being fine-tuned and redeployed daily. System prompts are tweaked continuously to improve accuracy.
Today at
Open source libraries patch automatically. Asking a development team to manually maintain an AI BOM spreadsheet is an exercise in futility. It will be outdated before the file is even saved.
So what does this all mean for the builders? How is it realistic?
Well, Psycode's core thesis is that AI BOM generation must be completely automated. It has to be integrated directly into the CI/CD pipeline.
Made with Wondercraft.
Your continuous integration and continuous deployment infrastructure.
Let's look at how that operates mechanically. So when a developer submits a pull request containing a new AI integration, the CI/CD pipeline triggers an automated policy check before the code can even be merged.
Start creating today at wondercraft.ai.
The automated tooling scans the code to identify the specific model being called. It checks the training data set against known licensing blacklists to ensure you aren't violating copyright.
Right, preventing that shadow AI.
Yeah, it detects unapproved external API calls instantly. And it also calculates the blast radius.
The blast radius.
Meaning, if a specific open source dependency is later found to be compromised, the automated AI BOM can instantly map every single production service relying on that vulnerable component.
That is incredibly powerful. It fundamentally shifts governance left in the development cycle. It prevents policy violations from ever reaching the production environment.
And the operational efficiency is undeniable. I mean, the IDC data cited in the Psycode report shows that organizations utilizing automated AI asset tracking reduce their audit preparation time by up to 40%.
40%. That is massive. You replace weeks of frantic, manual forensic work by your engineering team with the simple generation of a cryptographically verified ledger.
The transition from regulatory theorizing to enforcement engineering requires a fundamental re-architecture of both our software development pipelines and our legal frameworks. We have covered a massive amount of technical and legislative ground today.
We really have. Which is exactly why we need to distill this into the Friday Action Checklist. These are the 5 pragmatic, concrete steps you need to take back to your engineering and legal leadership tomorrow morning.
Let's do it. First, audit your substantial modifications.
Yes. You must map the exact mathematical delta between any open source base models you utilize and your proprietary fine-tuned versions. Document the training data provenance and the specific loss functions you utilized.
Because under the U.S. AI-led Act, that specific modification boundary defines your new product liability. You are no longer just a deployer. You are carrying the liability of a developer.
Second on the checklist, stress tests for foreseeable misuse.
Right. Abandon the illusion that a generic terms of service document is a valid legal defense. You must implement proactive model hardening utilizing latent space bounding and adversarial fine-tuning to survive the EU Article 5 strict liability trap.
Your security team needs to specifically red team your models against confabulation metrics, bias, and the generation of non-consensual content.
Made with Wondercraft.
If simple prompt engineering bypasses your guardrails, you are in violation.
Third, update your master service agreements.
Work directly with your legal counsel to rewrite your enterprise MSAs. Eliminate the generic standard issue liability caps. If your SaaS product requires human oversight to function safely, you must explicitly define the technical mechanics of that human-in-the-loop responsibility in the contract, ensuring your enterprise customers legally share the federal duty of care.
Fourth, implement intervention logs.
For any agentic systems operating with operational autonomy, you must build Enzy's Layer 4 traceability. Engineer immutable, cryptographically verifiable audit trails that log the exact multi-step reasoning chain, the API invocations, and the specific timestamp and session ID when a human operator reviewed or overrode the agent's escalation trigger.
And fifth, deploy an automated AI bomb.
Integrate automated AI asset tracking directly into your CI/CD pipelines. You must be able to dynamically generate a comprehensive hashed inventory of your models, datasets, dependencies, and system prompts to secure your mandatory AI security riders during the 2026 cyber insurance renewal cycle.
Manual spreadsheets simply will not scale.
They will not. So look, the board has been entirely reset. We have spent the last several years watching an industry arms race focused entirely on raw capability. Who has the longest context window, the fastest inference speeds, the most dynamic tool use.
Right, the Wild West.
Made with Wondercraft.
But raw capability devoid of structural control is simply a compounding liability. The era of move fast and break things cannot survive an environment governed by strict federal product liability and uninsurable cyber risk.
It's over. Compliance is no longer a back-office chore managed by a legal team reviewing PDFs. It is the new competitive frontier.
The SaaS platforms that dominate the market over the next 2 years will not just be the ones with the flashiest features. They will be the ones that can mathematically and structurally prove their safety to their customers, their regulators, and their insurers.
But the shift toward massive automated governance and strict developer liability introduces a really profound tension for the ecosystem. I think this is the producer's choice for today, the final thought to leave you all with.
Lay it on us.
If fine-tuning an open source model to execute a specific enterprise task immediately transfers billions of dollars in product liability to a 20-person startup, we have to ask what happens to the open source community itself.
Wow. Yeah, will the sheer cost of compliance, cryptographic auditing, and specialized cyber insurance mean that building and fine-tuning AI becomes a luxury that only the massive tech monopolies can afford?
Does enforcement engineering ultimately engineer the open source community out of existence?
That is a heavy question. And that is exactly the question we leave you to mull over. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep building responsibly.
Made with Wondercraft.
We will see you next time.
Start creating today at wondercraft.ai.
You've been listening to The Exposure Brief. If today's analysis highlighted a gap in your own product's liability surface area, don't wait for the audit. Head over to theguardrail.beehive.com, join the community, and get our weekly audit checklists. And for a private diagnostic of your narrative risk, visit swiftsignaldigital.card.co. Stay secure.
Made with Wondercraft. Start creating today